Welcome to the Fireside Chat with Comforte. I'm Brett Bicker, Head of Enterprise Market Development here at Comforte. I'm joined today by Trevor Morgan, the Head of Product Marketing at Comforte. And in these sessions, we like to just take a pause once a year and take time to just discuss upcoming trends, what's been working and not working in cybersecurity. And today we're focused on 2022, the upcoming year. And I'm glad to be with you today, Trevor.
Thanks, Brett. We've talked about this before, the joy in trying to predict. Prediction's really a hard thing, but I think it's something that's really valuable because what it allows us to do is look at the past year, see how well we're tracking with trends, and then try to make adjustments, and then of course measure ourselves at the end of each year. So I'm really looking forward to this. Whether I'm 100% accurate or not, that's a different question. Maybe we'll touch on that next year, but let's see where the conversation goes. I'm really looking forward to it.
Great. Well, to get us started, just to talk about sort of the cultural shift happening in cybersecurity in organizations. We all know that effective cybersecurity strategies are comprised both of technologies as well as processes that are implemented within organizations to protect against cyber threats. And even with all of that, the largest organizations with the largest IT security budgets, they're still suffering from data breaches and data loss. And so for those organizations that are reevaluating their security posture for 2022, can you just share with us, Trevor, what should organizations be doing in terms of reorienting their thinking that would allow them to improve the effectiveness of their cybersecurity strategy and their risk mitigation?
That's a really good question, Brett. And I really like one of the words that you used as well, which is posture, because we can talk about the technology and we will. But posture is a different thing. That kind of leads us to other words like mindset. And it's not as though companies don't put an effort to keep employees aware of cyber attack threats and the type of posture that they need to maintain. But I really wonder whether those efforts are changing their entire, let's call it their entire corporate culture. Let's face it. If they watch a 10-minute video providing some sort of high-level description of various hacker techniques and advice on thwarting those types of attacks, do we think that that gets the average employee where he or where she needs to be? We've all watched those types of things and had to take the subsequent test. Does that make our posture stronger? I don't think so. So it really needs to be across the organization a mindset that needs to be embedded into the corporate culture. And these notions that we're talking about, cyber safety, data privacy, data security, it really needs to get into the DNA of the organization. Everybody, from the executives down to the junior level interns who have just gotten out of college and entered the company, they all need to be actively talking about cybersecurity, data privacy. What does it mean? How do we do it on a moment-to-moment, hour-by-hour, day-by-day basis? Everybody needs to be taking a vested interest.
Yeah, such an important aspect, focusing on both awareness and training of end users, for sure. So, Trevor, if we look at sort of the traditional focus that the cybersecurity industry has had on preventing breaches, preventing intrusions, we know it's all about the IT infrastructure, protecting that infrastructure with tighter perimeters around it, controlling access to resources within it, that kind of thing, detecting and responding to events. But unfortunately, organizations just continue to learn the hard way that those strategies often are not enough. And so is this realization causing organizations to look to augment their strategies with additional approaches from the traditional methods? And what do we think that might look like, especially in the upcoming 2022?
Yeah, those are all great points. And you're really touching upon something that I want to emphasize, which is, relying on one particular technique or one particular tool or one particular protective method alone isn't enough. And so as we say, hey, border or perimeter based security, you need to move on. We're not saying move on and don't use that anymore. We're saying that you need to broaden the array of tools that you're using and the array of processes, because you can't rely on one alone. We have no real silver bullet where that's concerned. But it's not as though vendors and experts aren't sounding enough of a warning about traditional controls or legacy tools, if you're depending upon last generation or last generation tools, or perimeter-based security, or even tightening awareness around threat actors, tactics, and motivations. But I mean, we're seeing a lot of that, but somehow this message is getting lost in a way. It's getting lost in the mix. But in my eyes, it all boils down to that word I keep saying over and over. It's data, pure and simple. We're talking about data that's unprotected, but should really be the first thing you protect directly, not, as you say, the environment around it or the resources around that data. So think of it this way. Threat actors want one thing, and they want one thing only, and that's an organization's sensitive data. So the best way to deal with that is to apply protections not to the environment around that data, but protection methods directly to that data. So things like tokenization or format preserving encryption, which protect the data itself and travels with the data. So even if threat actors get their hands on it, they can't do anything with it because it's totally obfuscated and that data can't be compromised. So I think that in 2022, what we're going to see is more of an emphasis being placed on reducing the fallout of breaches rather than out and out preventing them 100%. So like an airbag in a car, we can't prevent car wrecks. They happen. No matter what we do, they're going to continue to happen. We can have public service announcements and they're still going to happen. But what we have in cars are these amazing things that help prevent injuries in the instance of a wreck, an airbag or a system of airbags. And so that's really what we're talking about. Organizations need to keep thinking about mitigation rather than purely preventing something bad from happening. And how do you mitigate the situation where bad people get their hands on your data? How do you protect it so that you mitigate the fallout? I think in 2022, more organizations are going to think about that and come up with answers that are better than last year.
Oh, that's a really great analogy, Trevor. I like the way of thinking about data-centric security as a way of preventing injury, not only to the organization that suffered the breach, but perhaps even to the consumers or other individuals that are represented by the data that otherwise would have been exposed. So that's a really great way to look at it. Perhaps organizations can adjust their mindset in that way. So if we look forward into sort of what the threat actors are doing now and what we think they're going to be doing in the coming year in 2022, they're obviously getting more creative. They're seeking, as you said, to acquire the organization's very valuable data, whether they're focused on monetizing it for their own personal gain or weaponizing it in order to destroy or do damage to the organization, or extorting something from the organization. What types of attacks or techniques do you expect to see, and should we expect to keep trending in terms of what these threat actors are doing to organizations that potentially we should be planning for?
Yeah, that's a great question. And as you and I and everybody listening knows, these types of attacks are only increasing in number, but more importantly, it's the chaotic element that is really growing around them. I think we're going to see ransomware attacks continuing simply because they wreak so much havoc, and that entices an organization to, let's call it, settle early. So there's a potential quick payout. And of course, the more havoc they wreak, the quicker they think that they're going to get a payout. And so I think we're going to see those continue. But as you alluded to, we're also going to see more adaptations and of the even tried and true methods of things like social engineering tricks. We're talking about methods like phishing. All it takes is for one person, and I was talking about this before, one person not to be focusing on the present situation and suddenly that person replies or clicks or does something, gives up too much information, launches an executable, something like that. And then it really starts a chain reaction of events that's really, a positive development for the threat actor that's sitting out there waiting for one more bit of information, waiting for one executable to be launched, and then they're off and running. So I think 2022 is not going to be a year where those tricks go away. As I said, I think we're gonna see those expand. But mitigative techniques like data-centric security, I think ultimately can help organizations keep private data private, even though these other things are going on. And it's really the one thing an organization can do is, at the end of the day, I have all of this sensitive information. And if it gets out into the public domain, that is catastrophic. So we are going to protect it with very powerful data-centric techniques so that in the instance that a trick plays out and this information falls into the wrong hands, that data cannot be compromised. So let's hope that 2022 is the year where, even though these types of attacks increase, the fallout lessens.
Yeah, Trevor, for sure. So the clearly the threats are not going away, and it's more important than ever to prevent intrusions from becoming data breaches, in addition to just focusing on the preventing of the intrusions themselves. So very good insight. Thank you. So you shared a little bit about ongoing trends, and some specific expectations, but do you have any big predictions in general, or anything specific to data-centric security, for example? Like, in terms of big predictions, sort of the way that I see cybersecurity going right now is there's this increased, we're already seeing the trend, right? This increased focus by organizations that I think will increase into 2022 around detection and response solutions. And that, of course, is a combination of technologies and human operations as well. And I think that's where the rub, so that there'll be this increased focus on it, but also this increased realization that it's also not enough, because AI and advanced technologies are being used to detect threats, but then human operations teams are having to review those, detected incidences or potential threats and evaluate them and decide if they can respond. So that, I think, is going to be something that increasingly becomes difficult to respond to in a timely manner. Still can't detect fast enough to be able to react and prevent damage and breaches on the data. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on what organizations are going to be doing this year in terms of those kinds of threats?
Yeah, Brad, we knew that this was leading up to that, but we both know that a prediction like that's a really tough one. But if I give one prediction, it's that I think we're going to see solutions that are emerging into the market. And by solutions, I mean data security solutions that are a bit more expansive than they are now. And what I mean by that is that they handle more than just one narrow part of the problem. Protecting data is one part of it. It's a critical part of it, but it's one part of the bigger scenario. Knowing where data is, knowing what that data is once you find it, and a lot of this data is unknown. An organization doesn't know what they have in this or that repository, and then knowing, well, what is this data? How do I classify or label this data? And a whole host of other actions. These are all part of a data security, I'll call it a workflow. I think that in 2022, you're going to see that the successful vendors, or the vendors that emerge out in front, are the ones who are providing solutions that are more end-to-end. But end-to-end in a seamless workflow that's easy to implement and that's easy to manage from an operational standpoint. That's my prediction for 2022.
Well, we all put our necks out there on what 22 will look like. I guess we'll see in a year how close we came to predicting what was going to be happening. I appreciate the time with you today, Trevor, and we'll enjoy seeing what evolves out of our predictions this year.
Thanks a lot, Brett. I do think we need to meet up in 12 months and let's listen to our answers again and see how right we were. But I really enjoyed this opportunity. Thanks.
And to all of you watching, thanks for joining us for this fireside chat. We will see you next year to see how well we did. Have a great year.